The amber glow of my desk lamp, a solitary sentinel in the vast gloom of my apartment, fought a losing battle against the encroaching night. Dust motes danced in its meager beam, a silent, swirling universe reflecting the stillness of my own life. Another bottle, half empty, stood sentinel beside a stack of cold case files, their covers bleached by time and neglect. The city outside, a distant hum of indifferent life, offered no solace, only a persistent reminder of what I had lost. My badge, my reputation, the sharp edge of my purpose, all had dulled into a weary resignation. I traced the faded photograph of a young woman pinned to the corkboard above my desk. My sister. Her smile, a ghost from a brighter past, mocked the silence that had grown between us over the years, a silence now destined to be eternal. We had drifted, a slow, inevitable separation, each word unspoken a brick in the wall that rose higher with every passing season. Now there would be no trying. The shrill cry of the landline, a sound almost archaic in its insistence, tore through the quiet. It was the lead detective, his voice a low, gravelly current stripped of its usual bravado. "Arthur," he began, a strange weight in his tone. "It's—" My breath hitched, a sudden, unexpected vacuum in my chest. He spoke of a discovery, a location I knew well, a place of desolate purpose. He spoke of an M.O. A knot tightened in my gut, a premonition of returning nightmare. The world tilted on its axis. The drive was a blur of streetlights and rain-slicked asphalt. My old sedan, a relic of better days, devoured the miles with a mournful growl. I found them at the border fence patrol zone at midnight. A constellation of flashing blue and red lights painted the desolate landscape, stark against the inky blackness. Patrol vehicles, like predatory insects, swarmed the perimeter, their beams carving paths through the mist that clung to the ground. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, pressed down on me. I pushed through the yellow tape, the plastic snapping against my coat, a sound like a distant gunshot. A uniformed officer, younger than I remembered them, tried to intercept me. "Sir, I can't. I'm Arthur." I cut him off, my voice rougher than intended. The detective called me. He recognized the name, or perhaps the haunted look in my eyes. He stepped aside, a flicker of pity in his gaze. The lead detective, a man whose face had aged into a roadmap of cynicism since our last encounter, stood hunched near the center of the activity, his silhouette stark against the floodlights. A silent acknowledgement passed between us, a shared history of unspoken failures. "Arthur," he said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "I'm sorry." I nodded, my throat a desert. My gaze, however, was already drawn past him, towards the grim tableau illuminated by the relentless glare. Her face, usually so vibrant, was now a mask of frozen agony, her eyes staring at the indifferent stars. Her body was arranged with a grotesque artistry, bound by strands of what appeared to be woven fabric, intricate and deliberate. A single crimson thread, like a mocking signature, was looped precisely around her wrist, contrasting starkly with the pallor of her skin. The pattern of the bindings, the deliberate, almost ritualistic presentation, ripped through the carefully constructed walls of my memory. My breath caught. It was him. It had to be. "We found her like this," the lead detective's voice cut through the buzzing in my ears. "No witnesses, no struggle, clean almost." "Clean," I echoed, the word a bitter taste. "You call this clean?" My voice was a rasp. He looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "You're thinking what I'm thinking, aren't you?" he asked, though it wasn't a question. He knew. We both knew, but I had not. I could never forget. The lead investigator, a meticulous woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, knelt beside the body, her gloved hands moving with practiced precision. He looked up at me, his expression guarded. "The fiber samples match the others, Arthur," he stated, his voice calm, professional, carrying a subtle tremor of recognition. "The weaving, the knot work. It's identical." My mind raced, images flashing. The first victim, a quiet librarian; the second, a student with aspirations; the third, a young mother. Each found with the same macabre signature, the intricate bindings, the crimson thread, the utterly silent departure. The night weaver, the papers had called him, a phantom who wove death into the fabric of the city and then vanished without a trace. The case that had unraveled my life piece by agonizing piece. Identical, I repeated the word a hammer blow. My sister, Alina, the one person left in my fractured world, now another thread in his twisted tapestry. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a message, a deliberate, cruel reminder of my greatest failure. The cold wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of regret and the promise of a returning terror. My hands clenched, gripped tight. The lead detective watched me, his expression unreadable. He knew the demons that stirred within me, the ones I had tried to drown in whiskey and solitude. He knew the ghosts that haunted my waking hours. But now, a new ghost walked among them, one with my sister's face. And this time there would be no running, no hiding. He had taken my sister to drag me back into the labyrinth I had barely escaped. My disgrace, my isolation, my very existence had become his bait. The determination I thought I had lost, buried under layers of failure and despair, began to stir, a flicker of an old fire. I would find him. I would unravel his monstrous design. Not for redemption, perhaps, but for the ghost of my sister and for the quiet vengeance that now burned in my soul. The night had claimed her, but it would not claim me. Not yet. The bitter kiss of the midnight air was a physical blow, sharper than any fist. It scraped against my raw nerves as I pushed past the yellow tape, ignoring the uniformed officer's barked protest. Family, I rasped, the word tasting like ash. He hesitated, recognizing the haunted look in my eyes, or perhaps the grim determination that had once defined me. Floodlights, harsh and unforgiving, tore holes in the night, revealing the grim tableau. The location itself was a wound. The desolate stretch of the border fence patrol zone at midnight. Barbed wire glinted, a metallic serpent writhing under the artificial sun. Beyond it, the vast, indifferent dark. Here, amidst the frozen earth and sparse, wind-whipped scrub, lay my sister, Alina. A tight knot of uniformed officers and plainclothes investigators huddled around the perimeter, their hushed voices a low hum of disquiet. My gaze cut through them, landing on the figure bending over the scene, his broad shoulders hunched, his movements precise. The lead detective. Markings of rank I knew too well were pinned to his collar, stark against the dark fabric of his jacket. His name I refused to utter, even in thought. He was once my subordinate, a man whose ambition had always bristled against my authority, now a rival whose skepticism would be a wall. Arthur. His voice, when he straightened and saw me, was a flat, weary sound. The air vibrated with unspoken history between us, a history of cases solved, and one in particular that had unmade me. Tell me what happened. He sighed, running a hand over his tired face. Looks like a random act of violence, Arthur. We're still processing. Don't touch anything. His eyes, hard and guarded, swept over my disheveled form, clearly seeing not a grieving brother but a ghost from a past he'd rather keep buried. A copycat maybe, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, but the M.O. isn't exact. Isn't exact. My voice rose, a sharp edge cutting through the calm. He was found bound, crimson thread. Tell me it wasn't. He hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Yes, but there are differences, small ones, enough to suggest an imitation or a different perpetrator altogether. He gestured vaguely towards the scene. We're considering all angles. His words were a shield designed to keep me out, to dismiss my experience. My eyes, however, had already found her, Alina, lying still, a silent testament to brutality. The crimson thread, stark against her pale skin, was indeed there, intricately woven, a macabre tapestry of restraint. It was the night weaver's signature, undeniable. Yet the lead detective's words echoed, differences. I forced myself closer, ignoring the warning glare of a junior officer. The general pattern was familiar, sickeningly so. But as I leaned in, my breath misting in the frigid air, a subtle dissonance pricked at my awareness. It wasn't just the overall design. It was a specific detail, almost hidden within the larger weave of crimson. The first cases, the ones that had consumed me, had all featured a particular knot. Not just any knot, but a specific, archaic fisherman's bend, modified in a unique way, almost a signature within the signature. It was a detail so obscure, so precise, that it had never been released to the public, known only to the inner circle of the original investigation. A secret shared amongst the hunters and the hunted. My eyes narrowed, tracing the crimson strands. There, at a critical juncture where the main bindings converged, I saw it. A twist, a loop, a specific interlock that was not the Night Weaver's signature knot. My breath hitched. This was what the lead detective meant by differences. But then my gaze drifted slightly, following a secondary strand, almost an afterthought in the complex web. And there, tucked beneath a fold of fabric almost invisible, was another knot. Smaller, tighter, perfect. My heart gave a sickening lurch. It was the other one, the true signature. The modified fisherman's bend, so subtly placed it could easily be dismissed as a random tightening, an accidental detail. It wasn't part of the primary, visible binding. It was an underknot, a hidden flourish, designed to be overlooked by anyone not intimately familiar with the Night Weaver's peculiar artistry. "You missed something," I murmured, my voice barely audible above the wind's mournful sigh. My fingers, trembling slightly, pointed towards the hidden detail. The lead detective scoffed. "Arthur, don't interfere. We've been over every inch, this right here." My finger hovered inches from the tiny, perfect knot. This wasn't part of the main design. It's an addition. A message. The other cases. He always left a secondary, almost invisible knot, a specific type. The one you wouldn't tell the press about. The one only we knew. His face, already etched with fatigue, tightened further. He leaned in reluctantly, his brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the spot I indicated. He saw the obvious, the primary knot. But then, as he followed my gaze, tracing the crimson thread with his own, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly as they snagged on the hidden, smaller knot. The wind seemed to die, holding its breath. This wasn't a copycat. This was the Night Weaver. He hadn't just returned, he had come for me. My past had finally caught up, and it had brought its crimson thread. His face, already etched with fatigue, tightened further. But then, as he followed my gaze, tracing the crimson thread with his own, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly as the second knot, a more intricate and insidious twist, revealed itself. A dark crimson whisper against the pale, bruised skin. The air, already thick with the scent of metallic tang and damp earth, seemed to hold its breath. He straightened slowly, his gaze meeting mine, a flicker of something akin to reluctant understanding, or perhaps just a dawning dread in their depths. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The message was clear. I left the scene as the first streaks of dawn bled across the bruised horizon, the city awakening to another day of oblivious existence. The image of the second knot, so subtle, so deliberate, clung to my mind like a shroud. My old apartment was a tomb of forgotten dreams and half-finished investigations. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through grimy windows, illuminating stacks of cardboard boxes, each one a sarcophagus of paper, holding the ghosts of cases past. I ripped open the one marked Night Weaver Unsolved, the label itself a testament to my failure. Yellowed reports spilled forth, brittle photographs of victims stared up at me with vacant eyes, and forensic notes, once painstakingly compiled, now seemed like hieroglyphs from a dead language. The scent of stale coffee and desperation rose from the papers, a familiar perfume. Hours blurred into a relentless current of caffeine and regret. I traced every line, every discarded theory, every dead end. My fingers, stained with printer ink and the dust of years, sought a tremor, a discordant note in the symphony of despair. The Night Weaver. My gaze snagged on a witness statement, tucked away in an appendix, almost an afterthought. A night watchman, long since retired or passed, had reported a peculiar detail from the scene of the fourth victim. Not a sight, but a sound. A rhythmic, almost mechanical clack-clack-clack in the dead of night, followed by a faint, acrid smell like burnt sugar. Just before the discovery, it had been dismissed as industrial noise from a nearby factory or simply the old man's imagination. A loom, a specific type of machinery, and the smell, burnt sugar, I needed to test the waters to see if the old guard still remembered, or if they had simply whitewashed me from their collective memory. My first call went to the commander, a man whose face had grown heavier with the weight of bureaucracy since my departure. His voice, when it finally answered, was a gravelly rumble of annoyance. "Arthur, I thought you'd finally found peace in obscurity." His tone was a razor's edge, keen with years of unspoken resentment. "My sister," I began, my voice a strained wire, "Oh, it's the Night Weaver." A sharp, humorless laugh crackled through the line. "Still seeing specters, Arthur. We closed that chapter. A copycat at best, or a deranged opportunist. Don't go digging up old graves. You're not one of us anymore." "The knot work," I pressed, ignoring his dismissal. "The secondary knot hidden beneath the primary, it's identical, and I found something else, a detail from the fourth victim, a sound, a smell." "I have a city to run, Arthur." He cut me off, his patience worn thin. "Focus on your grief, not on fabricating connections where none exist. We have our own investigation. Leave it to the professionals." The line went dead, the familiar sting of professional disdain, a wound that never truly healed. Undeterred, I made another call, this one to a former analyst, a quiet woman who had a knack for remembering obscure details. He had always been an ally, if a cautious one. I fed her the details of the forgotten witness statement. "Burnt sugar, you say?" Her voice, usually calm, held a note of genuine curiosity. "And that rhythmic sound? It was dismissed, yes, but I recall a note. A forensic technician, a junior at the time, mentioned a trace element. A residue almost invisible. We never found a match, assumed contamination." "What kind of residue?" I asked, my blood quickening. "Organic, a polymer of sorts, extremely fine. We thought it might be from the victim's clothing, but it was unique. Like a synthetic thread, but not quite. Very specific." The technician noted it was similar to something found in specialized manufacturing, not common apparel. A synthetic thread, burnt sugar, rhythmic clacking. A specialized manufacturing process involving fine, unique threads and a distinct smell. It wasn't just about the victims. It was about the tools used, the craft of the killer. The city outside my window had fallen into the indigo depths of late afternoon when my phone vibrated again. This time, it was a news alert, a stark headline flashing across the screen. "Second victim discovered." My breath hitched. The location, the border fence patrol zone at midnight. My stomach churned with a sickening lurch. I drove through the gathering gloom, my heart a dull drum against my ribs. The news report, a hushed voice over a grainy image, confirmed my worst fears. The they was unmistakable. The Night Weaver had returned, not just for me, but for the entire city. And now, armed with a forgotten sound, a peculiar smell, and the ghost of a synthetic thread, I knew this wasn't just about vengeance for my sister. It was a message, woven into the very fabric of fear, and I was the only one left to unravel it. The hunt had truly begun. The wind, a raw blade honed on distant, forgotten plains, scoured the border fence patrol zone at midnight. It carried the grit of the earth and the faint, metallic tang of the towering barrier, a skeletal spine dividing worlds. My breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a ghost of the life I was fighting to reclaim. This desolate stretch, a no-man's land of whispering barbed wire and flickering surveillance lights, was where I now hunted, far from the polished desks and sterile forensics labs of my former life. Official channels were closed to me, but the city's underbelly, a writhing network of shadows and whispers, remained an open book. My gaze swept the empty landscape, a panorama of muted grays and deep, unforgiving blacks. The rhythmic hum of distant generators, a mechanical heartbeat, was the only sound besides the ceaseless moan of the wind. He appeared as if conjured from the very gloom, a wraith-like figure emerging from the shadow of a derelict watchtower, his face obscured by a low-brimmed cap. "Arthur," the whisperer rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He shifted, his gaze darting across the fence line. "The new one, the pattern maker, name's Lyra, used to work out of a small studio in the old industrial district. You know the place near the abandoned textile mill." My jaw tightened. Lyra. Another life extinguished, another thread cut. What about her? Quiet type, kept to herself, but he had a secret, Arthur, a shared past with your sister. My breath hitched. Eleanor, years ago, an artisan collective, met in an underground bunker beneath the old docks, called themselves the Loom Weavers. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Loom Weavers. The synthetic thread, the rhythmic clacking, the specialized manufacturing process, it all began to coalesce into a horrifying vision. What did they do? I pressed, my mind racing, sorting through fragments of memory, trying to recall if Eleanor had ever mentioned such a group. He had always been artistic, drawn to the unconventional, but he had kept so much hidden. Textiles, intricate stuff, unique patterns, dyes. They were obsessed with rare fibers, obscure techniques. Lyra, he was a master with a specialized loom, made these. Intricate tapestries, almost like maps. And Eleanor, she designed some of the patterns I hear, abstract, complex. A bonding agent for the unique threads, had a distinct smell when heated. It wasn't just about the victims, it was about the tools used, the craft involved, the shared secret that bound them. The Night Weaver wasn't choosing victims at random. They were tight-lipped, very insular, met in secret. There were rumors of a leader, someone who orchestrated their projects, but no one ever saw them clearly. Subversive. They created these intricate fabric maps, supposedly coded with information. Locations, names, dates. Nobody knew what for. My mind flashed back to the cryptic symbols Eleanor had been sketching in her notebook, symbols I'd dismissed as abstract art. Now, they felt like breadcrumbs leading into a labyrinth. Eleanor wasn't just a victim, he was a part of this web, and the killer was systematically unraveling it. And if Eleanor and Lyra were connected by this secret society, what about me? What role did I inadvertently play in this macabre game? These people, they vanished after the collective dissolved, like ghosts, and whoever is doing this, they're good at making sure secrets stay buried. He paused, his gaze fixed on my face. Be careful, old friend. I read digging in dangerous ground. This isn't just about catching a killer anymore, it feels like a reckoning. The revelation of the Loom Weavers had not clarified the picture. It had painted it in starker, more terrifying hues. Eleanor's death, Lyra's brutal end, they were deliberate messages. Each victim a carefully chosen piece in a puzzle designed to ensnare me. The killer wasn't just mirroring the Night Weaver. He was weaving a new pattern, one that seemed to lead directly to my own doorstep. The hunt had just become personal, deeper, and far more perilous than I had ever imagined. I had to find the next thread before the killer did. The hum of the fence, a low, metallic moan, vibrated through the soles of my boots at the border fence patrol zone at midnight. It was a desolate symphony, playing to a crowd of one, and its dirge echoed the hollow ache in my chest. The Loom Weavers. The words the stranger had uttered clung to me like burrs, snagging on every raw nerve. Eleanor's death, Lyra's brutal end, they were deliberate messages, each thread pulled taut, each knot tied with gruesome intent. But a message to whom and from whom? The wind, a bitter blade, scoured the barren ground, kicking up dust and the scent of dry earth. I walked slowly along the perimeter, my gaze sweeping the churned soil, the sparse, tenacious weeds, the occasional discarded detritus of human transit. My flashlight beam, a frail spear, pierced the suffocating dark, searching for what I didn't yet know. Eleanor had a meticulous mind, a hidden resilience I'd often underestimated. If he was caught in this web, she wouldn't have gone without a struggle, without leaving a trace. I remembered a conversation years ago when Eleanor had spoken of an old acquaintance who'd settled near the border, involved in some obscure textile trade. I dismissed it then, a fleeting detail in a rambling sibling chat. Now the Loom Weavers twisted that memory into something sinister. Could she have been here meeting someone, or searching for something herself? My foot snagged on something half-buried near a cluster of thorny bushes. I knelt, the gravel biting into my knees, and swept away the loose soil with gloved hands. It was a small, weather-beaten wooden box, no bigger than my palm, nestled amongst the roots. Its surface was scarred by time and exposure, The wood splintered in places, but the latch, surprisingly, held firm. A frantic drumbeat began within my ribs. With trembling fingers, I pried open the rusted clasp. Inside, cradled on a bed of faded, dry grass, lay two items. One was a small, intricately woven swatch of fabric, no larger than a postage stamp, its pattern complex and unfamiliar, a series of interlocking geometric shapes in muted earth tones. The threads felt coarse beneath my thumb, yet resilient, almost metallic in their stiffness. The other was a photograph, its edges softened by damp, the image within bleached by sun and time. It depicted a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, her face earnest, her eyes holding a quiet intensity that snagged at my memory. She wore simple, functional clothing, and behind her, the blurred outline of a similar border fence stretched into the distance. The fabric. My mind, usually a cluttered attic, began to sort and sift. The original Night Weaver case, the victimology, the bizarre, almost ritualistic presentation of the bodies. The fragment was similar in weave, in texture, in the very feel of it to the one now in my hand. We'd called it a ceremonial shroud, a macabre flourish, and moved on. We'd overlooked its specificity. Then, the photograph, the young woman's face. It was the first victim. I was sure of it now, the way her hair fell, the slight tilt of her head. Years of looking at blurred crime scene photos, witness sketches, and reconstruction images had etched her into my subconscious. But her full identity, her past, had never truly been unearthed. He was Jane Doe, the catalyst. Aliner hadn't just stumbled into this. He had been investigating it. He had found this fabric, the key that connected the first, overlooked victim to the loom weavers, to this specific place. He was trying to finish what I had failed to start, trying to unravel the true identity of the Night Weaver's inaugural sacrifice, the one who held the real key to the killer's motive. And the killer knew. This wasn't a copycat, a phantom mimicking old horrors. This was the original Night Weaver, or someone so intimately tied to that first, foundational crime that they would kill to keep its secrets buried. Aliner's death wasn't a random act or a simple message in the pattern. It was a termination. He was too close to the truth, too close to the source. And now I held the same evidence. The world narrowed to the beam of my unsteady light, illuminating the fabric and the faded face of the first victim. Aliner's final message, hidden in plain sight, screamed across the years. And by picking up her thread, by holding these remnants of her desperate search, I had just painted a bullseye on my own back. The Night Weaver hadn't returned for the city, they had returned for me. And the game, I realized with a sickening lurch, had just begun. The metallic moan of the border fence, a desolate symphony, grated against the midnight air. It was a cold, indifferent sound, vibrating through the soles of my boots, a dirge for the hollow ache in my chest. The loom weavers. The words, whispered by the stranger in the previous chapter, had clung to me like burrs, sharpening into a spear of ice. They were not merely words, they were a key, a twisted passphrase from a forgotten past. I stood there, a solitary figure dwarfed by the looming structure, the wind a cruel hand pushing against my coat. The Night Weaver, my sister. The two threads, once disparate, now intertwined, forming a knot of agonizing clarity. This wasn't a copycat, not truly. This was a continuation, a twisted legacy, woven by hands intimately familiar with the original pattern. My sister's death wasn't random, wasn't collateral damage. It was a deliberate message, a crimson stitch in a tapestry meant for my eyes alone. The loom weavers. It spoke of meticulous planning, of intricate designs, of lives pulled and snapped like thread. It spoke of someone who saw the world as a grand, flawed design, and believed themselves capable of reweaving its fabric, and who, in that original, sprawling failure of an investigation, had such an intimate, almost obsessive knowledge of the Night Weaver's methods, his almost ritualistic precision, who had cataloged every minute detail, every discarded clue, every overlooked pattern, while I, the supposed lead, stumbled in the dark. Not a partner, not a rival, but someone who had been behind the scenes, observing, compiling, perhaps even silently correcting my mistakes. The archivist, the quiet, almost invisible figure who had spent countless hours in the sterile confines of the evidence room, hunched over files, meticulously cross-referencing, charting, creating those vast, intricate diagrams of connections I had barely glanced at. The archivist, whose name I could barely recall now, but whose intense, unblinking gaze I remembered from the periphery of my awareness. They had seen everything, every failure, every missed opportunity. And perhaps they had never forgotten. The vendetta was clear, etched in the blood-soaked fabric of my sister's life. They weren't just a killer. They were a judge, a twisted curator of justice, aiming to punish me for my past failures, for my hubris, for the lives I couldn't save. My sister's death was the first, agonizing thread in their new design, a deliberate provocation, a challenge thrown at my feet. If the archivist was the loom weaver, then they would anticipate my every move, every desperate lurch towards the truth. They knew my habits, my weaknesses, the ghosts that haunted my waking hours. Not this time. This time I would set the stage. I would be the bait. I knew the archivist's meticulous nature, their theatrical flair, their almost perverse appreciation for symmetry and symbolism. They would want to finish this where it began, or where its true significance lay for them. Not the first crime scene, too obvious. Not my sister's apartment, too personal in a crude way. No, a place that resonated with the failure of the original investigation. A place where the threads of the Night Weaver's pattern had truly begun to fray for me. My mind drifted to the old municipal clock tower, its rusted gears forever frozen at the hour. The Night Weaver's third victim was discovered, just blocks away. It was a silent monument to a stalled investigation, a symbol of time running out. It was a place I had often found myself staring at in the depths of my despair, a public wound. It was the perfect stage for their final, deadly performance. I had one call to make, one desperate plea to a past I tried to bury. The detective, the one who had watched me fall, who had inherited my mess, who had always viewed me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. He wouldn't believe me, not at first, but I had to try. "It's Arthur," I rasped when he finally answered, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. "Arthur, do you know what time it is?" The detective's voice was sharp, laced with a familiar weariness. "I know who it is," I cut him off, my voice raw, the words tumbling out heavy with certainty. "The loom weaver, it's the archivist, from the original task force, the archivist. What even is that? A conspiracy theory? Not a ghost, a forgotten detail. A person who saw everything we missed. They're finishing what the Night Weaver started, or what they believe we failed to finish. My sister wasn't random. He was a message, a thread in their design. They want me to watch them complete their work, to feel the failure again." I could hear the desperation in my own voice, but also a steel I hadn't felt in years. "They're going to be at the old clock tower, tonight, at the stroke of what would have been the hour of the third victim's discovery." Another pause, longer this time. I imagined him rubbing sleep from his eyes, the weight of his own caseload pressing down. He'd seen me like this before, manic, teetering on the edge. But something in my tone, perhaps the sheer conviction, must have pierced through his skepticism. "The clock tower," he finally murmured, the irritation replaced by a cautious curiosity. "That's bold and stupid. You're walking into a trap, Arthur." "No," I countered, a grim smile touching my lips. "I'm setting one. I'm the bait. They'll expect me. They won't expect us. I have a theory, a chain of deductions. It all fits. The patterns, the meticulousness, the way the M.O. mirrors yet subtly elevates the original. It's someone who understood the Night Weaver better than anyone, someone who felt they were the true inheritor of his twisted vision, someone who felt I robbed them of their moment." The detective sighed, a heavy sound that spoke of resignation. "All right, Arthur, just tell me where. And if this goes south, you're on your own. You always are." His voice was grudging, but there was a flicker of something else beneath it, a reluctant spark of shared duty, perhaps even a sliver of belief. Or maybe, just maybe, he was tired of cleaning up my messes and wanted to see this one through to its bitter end. "Meet me in 15 minutes, I said, my voice firm. "Near the old abandoned train depot, 2 blocks from the tower. Don't come in uniform. Don't bring a siren. Just bring a weapon and a clear head. The wind whipped around me, carrying the distant wail of a train, a mournful sound that echoed the tension coiling in my gut. The stage was set. The loom weaver would be waiting, and for the first time in years, I felt a terrible, exhilarating sense of purpose. I was walking into a dangerous situation, yes, but I was walking into it with open eyes, no longer blinded by the past. The night weaver had returned, or his disciple had, and I would be there to meet them. The cold bit at my exposed hands, not just from the wind, but from the raw apprehension that gnawed at my bones. The distant wail of a train, a mournful sound, had faded, replaced by the hushed whisper of the night wind through skeletal brush. I stood in the desolate expanse of the border fence patrol zone at midnight, a place where the city's ambition frayed into forgotten wilderness. Above me, the skeletal silhouette of the fence stretched, a jagged scar against the bruised purple of the sky, its barbed wire teeth glinting under the pale moon. My breath plumed, a fleeting ghost in the frigid air. He was here. The loom weaver would be waiting. Arthur, a voice finally sliced through the quiet, not a shout, but a low, resonant hum that carried effortlessly across the barren ground. It came from the shadow cast by a derelict guard tower, a shape that detached itself from the deeper gloom. The figure stepped into a sliver of moonlight, revealing the familiar, stern face of the former precinct captain, the man who had overseen my unit, the very architect of my professional demise. My stomach clenched, a sickening plunge. The pieces, scattered and sharp-edged, clicked into place with a brutal, undeniable finality. The subtle nudges away from certain leads, the convenient disappearances of evidence, the way my own failures had been meticulously amplified. It had always been him. My hands, still in my pockets, curled around the worn grip of the heavy wrench I'd brought, a crude weapon for a brutal truth. I should have known. A dry, humorless laugh escaped his lips, thin as the blade of a knife. I was always too close, Arthur, too sharp, too honest for my own good. I saw the patterns before anyone else, even when I didn't understand the tapestry. He gestured vaguely at the fence. This place, it's a perfect metaphor, isn't it? A line, a division, order, and what lies beyond it. I always tried to cross that line to bring the chaos back into the light. A final, undeniable clue. I needed a reason to look again, didn't I, to feel that old fire. He was an artist in his own way, but sloppy, impulsive. I learned from his mistakes, refined the craft, made it meaningful. My mind reeled. Not a copycat, not entirely. A successor, a student who had surpassed his teacher, or perhaps the original all along, operating under a different guise, a different purpose. He had woven himself into the very fabric of the investigation, into my life from the beginning. He was a force, an expression. I simply gave that expression a direction, a purpose. You see, Arthur, some people need to be culled. Some threads need to be cut from the loom. Your sister. He was a loose end, a connection to you, a potential witness to my early artistry, and a beautiful way to bring you back into the game. The wind gusted, rattling the fence, a sound like dry bones clattering. This wasn't a confession, it was a prelude. You won't get away with this, I said, my voice low, determined. He laughed again, a sound devoid of mirth. I already have, Arthur, for years. You just haven't been paying attention. He lunged, a surprising burst of speed from a man I remembered as slow, deliberate. My years of training, buried under layers of rust and regret, sparked to life. I ducked, the knife whistling past my ear, the cold wind of its passage a stark warning. I swung the wrench, a clumsy arc, but it connected with his forearm, a sickening thud that made him grunt. He stumbled back, his face contorted in a momentary grimace of pain. "Still got some fight in you, old dog," he sneered, shaking his arm. The knife was still firmly clutched in his hand. He came at me again, faster this time, aiming for my gut. I twisted, my body remembering movements I thought long forgotten, parrying his thrust with the wrench. The clang of metal on metal echoed in the vast emptiness. This wasn't just a fight, it was an exorcism. Every blow he aimed was a ghost from my past, every parry a desperate attempt to reclaim my future. He was stronger than I remembered, fueled by a deranged conviction. His knife carved arcs in the air, forcing me to retreat, my back nearing the unforgiving mesh of the border fence. A stray cut grazed my shoulder, a sharp sting that bloomed into a warm, sticky wetness beneath my coat. I tasted iron not from the wound but from the raw effort, the primal fear that clawed at my throat. He pressed his advantage, driving me against the fence. The cold metal bit into my spine through my thin coat. The barbed wire above seemed to watch, silent and menacing. He aimed a vicious jab at my chest. I blocked, but the force of the blow sent a jolt up my arm, numbing my fingers. The knife gleamed, poised for a final, fatal strike. Just like before, you always fail. But I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of the old resentment, the subtle envy he'd always harbored for my quick mind, my relentless pursuit of truth. He saw himself as the master weaver, but I had always been the one to see the loose threads. My foot lashed out, a desperate, wild kick to his knee. He cried out, a sharp, surprised yelp, his balance shattering. The knife clattered from his grasp as he stumbled, collapsing to one knee. I didn't hesitate. My hand shot out, grasping a fistful of his hair, slamming his head against the unforgiving metal post of the fence. Once, twice. The dull thud reverberated through my arm, a sickening echo of justice. He went limp, his body slumping against the fence, eyes wide and unseeing, a thin trickle of blood appearing at his temple. The knife lay on the ground just beyond his reach. My shoulder throbbed, a dull, insistent ache, and the cold air bit at the fresh wound. I stood over him, gasping, my lungs burning. The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass, carrying the faint, metallic tang of blood. The night weaver, the loom master, lay broken at my feet. The truth had been revealed, yes, but the cost. The cost was etched into my sister's memory, into the scars on my soul, and now into the raw, aching flesh of my shoulder. The stage was cleared, but the play was far from over. My foot lashed out, a desperate, wild kick to his knee, a guttural grunt escaping his lips as his leg buckled. The impact vibrated up my shin, a dull throb against the adrenaline-fueled roar in my ears. We were a tangle of limbs and desperate will, silhouetted against the pale, indifferent glow of the patrol lights in the distance. The air, sharp and frigid, tasted of dust and the metallic tang of the border fence itself, a cold, unyielding barrier stretching into the midnight void. Each gust of wind carried the hollow whisper of the desert, a witness to this final, desperate dance. He twisted, a blur of movement, his hand grappling for my throat. He believed himself the architect of my ruin, the true night weaver. In this desolate stretch of the border fence patrol zone at midnight, he sought to complete his masterpiece. "You always saw the threads, Arthur," the former colleague hissed, his voice a venomous rasp against my ear, but I was the one who pulled them. His fingers dug into my windpipe, a crushing grip that stole my breath. Stars swam at the edges of my vision, the world tilting precariously. My own hand scrabbled, finding purchase on his arm, twisting with all the desperate strength I possessed. This wasn't just for my sister. It was for every innocent life, every shattered family, every ghost that had haunted my waking hours. It was for the man I used to be, now resurrected in this brutal, unforgiving moment. I drove my knee into his gut, a sickening thud that momentarily loosened his hold. Air rushed back into my lungs, ragged and burning. He staggered back, coughing, a pained grimace twisting his face. In that fleeting moment of vulnerability, I saw my chance. He scrambled, trying to regain his footing, but the blow had disoriented him. His eyes, once alight with malevolent cunning, now held a dazed, animalistic fear. I lunged, tackling him against the fence, pinning him with the weight of my body, the years of failure, and the searing memory of my sister's vacant eyes. His head struck a metal support post with a dull thud. He went limp, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. I stood over him, my chest heaving, the cold metal of the fence biting into my hands. The fight was over. The night weaver, the phantom that had haunted my city and my soul, lay subdued at my feet. The patrol car screeched to a halt a few yards away. Two officers emerged, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, momentarily blinding me. "Arthur," One of them called, his voice laced with disbelief and a hint of recognition. I didn't answer, simply stepped back, revealing the figure crumpled against the fence. The officer's beam found the former colleague's face, slack and pale. A gasp escaped the patrolman. By all that's holy, it's him. My body ached with 1,000 small pains, each one a testament to the brutal struggle. The adrenaline began its slow, inevitable retreat, leaving a vast, empty expanse in its wake. They secured him, cuffing him with a professional efficiency that felt utterly alien after the raw chaos of our confrontation. I watched them, my gaze unwavering, as they read him his rights, his eyes flickering open, meeting mine with a spark of pure, undiluted hatred before dulling once more. The other detectives arrived soon after, their faces a mixture of shock, grim satisfaction, and grudging respect. "You got him, Arthur," one of them murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. "After all this time." I nodded, unable to form words. The truth, stark and brutal, lay before us. The man who had woven a tapestry of fear and grief, who had used my own past against me, was finally caught. All of it designed to implicate me, to prove his twisted superiority, to finally break me. But I hadn't broken. My sister's memory had been a steel rod in my spine. Later, as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and gray, I sat alone on the tailgate of a patrol vehicle, sipping lukewarm coffee. The border fence patrol zone at midnight, once a place of violent resolution, was now merely a crime scene, meticulously documented. There would be questions, investigations, the long, arduous process of justice, but the truth was out. My sister's death was not a random act. It was a deliberate message, a cruel punctuation mark in a decades-long vendetta. The scars, I knew, would remain. But as I watched the sunrise chase away the last vestiges of night, a different feeling stirred within me. Not peace, not entirely. Perhaps a fragile sense of equilibrium. The scales of justice, though weighted with unbearable cost, had finally tipped. I didn't know what the future held. Perhaps a quiet life, far from the city's grim underbelly. Perhaps a return to the work, but with a different purpose, a renewed clarity. The path ahead was undefined, a blank canvas. But for the first time in years, the crushing weight of the past had lifted, replaced by the quiet, resolute strength of a man who had faced his demons and, against all odds, had pulled the final, unraveling thread.